ahead and get started. Welcome back, guys, to another week of Better Punting, Better Outcome, just helping you all to be able to, or helping nonprofits specifically, to be able to not only evaluate your programs in a monitoring evaluation plan, but more specifically to prove your impact. Prove your impact so that you end up increasing the likelihood of you getting different monetary funds from different donors as they gain more trust, as you're able to record and prove all the stuff that you guys do. And so just as another note, you don't have to have your screen on, but if you would like to, that's always just the invitation that's there. And so brief overview of what we went through last week and actually what we've been going through the last couple of weeks, few weeks actually. We've been going through different stages that really help us to identify as nonprofits what type of help that we really do need. And so the last few weeks we've been going through that, going through 4 different stages. And so this week we're actually going to talk about the last stage. And so I'm going to briefly go through those different stages just to be as a review, but also I'm going to go through the questions that actually help you to identify based off your responses what stage you're at. So I'm going to briefly just glance over that a little bit. And so the 4 questions that help you to identify, the first one was, on a scale from 1 to 10, how often does your organization already evaluate your programs? So just looking at how often, the number of times, the longevity of how long you've actually been evaluated. And these are questions, again, that are specifically pertain to evaluations. Second question, on a scale from 1 to 10, how strong is your organization in evaluating your program? So looking again at your perception of your strength in conducting that evaluation. Third question, on a scale from 1 to 10, how strong are you at evaluating programs based off of the perspective of donors? So looking at that, not only looking at your strength from your perception, but looking at your strength based off of asking questions to the people that you actually want to fund you. And then the final question, on a scale from 1 to 10, how experienced or mature in knowledge are you as an organization evaluating your programs? Just because you're evaluating those programs for a long period of time doesn't necessarily mean that you have the knowledge and the maturity in conducting those evaluations. And so you want to look at, on a scale of 1 to 10, where you are within those 4 different questions. And so the 4 different stages are, so stage 1, it's the stage where it's I do and you watch and we talk. And so in looking at sort of those responses to those questions, if you're responded with maybe a cumulative or an aggregate amount of a 1 to 3, then that's probably the stage that you're at, where it is I do. So I'm doing the work. I'm 100% of the work. 100% of your work is watching. And then it's us talking after. Stage 2 was I do, and it's a little bit different. It's you help, and then we talk. So it's 50-50 in terms of the work, where it's 50% of me doing, but it's also 50% of you actually helping and assisting. The stage that we talked about last week was stage 3, where we flip it around a little bit, where it's you do and I help and we talk. So now, rather than you doing 50% of just helping, you're actually doing 50% of the work that I was doing before. And then I am sort of taking on the role that you used to have in me just helping you guys. And all of this is to really emphasize this image of walking along you guys, walking beside you guys, ultimately to set you up for success as I'm working myself out of a job. And that's the theme that I'm going to keep saying over and over again, because that is something that I strongly believe in. Stage 4 is what we're going to be talking about now. Stage 4 is when within those responses, you're probably going to get around an 8 to a 10. So stage 1 again was 1 to 3. Stage 2, it's a 4 to 5. Stage 3, 6 to 7, and then stage 4, it is a 8 to 10, excuse me. And so stage 4 is the you do, I watch, excuse me, you do, I watch, and we talk. And so that is the stage that we're actually going to be going through today, and just really looking at just different practicals on what that specifically looks like. And I want to start out with, I think, an example I always provide, probably like a familial example at that, because I've learned a lot from my mom and dad. And so one of the things that my mom and dad were able to help me through is that they taught me how to learn. And it seems like a weird concept, because I think a lot of times we have this expectation that you should already know how to learn, but that's not true. And so we actually have to be taught how to learn. And so for me, after they taught me how to learn and took me through these steps, I got to this place where they were able to sit back and sort of watch me go through it. because they showed me all the principles. They showed me all the stuff that I needed to learn. I watched as they sort of went along and did it in their own lives. I imitated them. And at some point within my academics, within my employment, whatever I was doing, because they taught me how to go about learning, they were able just to sit back and watch. And that is the perfect example, at least for me, when it comes to this stage, where I am at a position where my work is where I sit back and watch. And you are doing all of the work. And so what does that specifically look like? Well, I think that one of the things that you're going to get out of being in this stage, or the way you know that you're in this stage, in addition to answering those 4 questions that we talked about, is when you are realizing that you are problem solving. You're problem solving with sufficient knowledge. So it's one thing to problem solve when you have no knowledge and you can sort of figure it out, and that's how you get that idea of finessing. But it's another thing to be able to problem solve with sufficient knowledge. And that's what happens when you're at this stage where different problems come up, because we know that everything doesn't go our way, especially when it comes to evaluations. But when we're able to have sufficient knowledge, we can take that knowledge, think on the fly, apply all those principles that we learned, and then be able to be problem solvers. And so this is where you will really be fantastic at solving different problems that come up as you're doing an evaluation. I think one of those, to share an example for me. So as I was doing an evaluation for the Often Addiction and Services for then Philadelphia specifically, one of their programs, their participants come in at different times. So normally I was used to evaluating sort of everybody at the same time, because that's sort of how a program goes. All the participants start at one time, they end at the same time, and then you're able to sort of just dish out that survey, dish out that evaluation at the same time. But in this one, they were coming in at sporadic times. And it was really weird. I was like, how am I going to be able to do this evaluation? Well, I was able to figure out through sufficient knowledge and through my mentors of how to go about and problem solve that, so I still could be able to conduct the evaluation through that. And so that's just one example. And the way that I did that, to share just the further that example, the way that I did that was I just divided up into 3 different phases. So as in doing more digging into their program, they have 3 different phases that their participants have to go through. And so no matter where you start, you're still going to land in those 3 different stages. So I was able to problem solve and figure out how to evaluate those programs based off those 3 different phases. So I share that example so you know that this is something that I still am even going through and always am able to have to problem solve. And so it's funny that actually using that same thing ended up being able to apply to another program that I'm about to be evaluating, which is a same-day pay program that I'm about to be going and doing. And so that's just one thing just to be look out for, specifically for your organizations. If you're able to really just problem solve with sufficient knowledge, you probably are at the stage 4. I think another thing is within this stage, you're going to be able to develop a routine. You're going to be able to develop a process, develop a habit. One of the things that I've learned at a very young age is that probably it takes around 66 days to build a habit. Well, within this, you have developed a habit, developed a process, developed a routine of going from one thing to another and evaluating your programs. And for me specifically, what that looked like was when I started out evaluating the program, I created a process, but then I started implementing it. And then as I implemented it, I started getting used to, okay, this is how I'm going to do it. This is how I'm going to do it. This is how I'm going to do it. And I didn't really have to switch up too many things. Well, I started to get into the groove. And this is, I guess, another way you can think about it is getting into the groove of something. And it's when you've developed a groove, you've developed a process, you sort of know what you're going to be doing pretty much so, and more than even vaguely, but you know what you're going to be doing as you're conducting that evaluation within your programs. And you're going to be developing to that habit and developing that process and developing really just this routine. The other part of that, which is sort of the third idea in this, is you're going to be able to personalize it. So you're personalizing your process. And the thing about that is that until you're able to develop your process, you're not necessarily going to be able to personalize it quite yet. So in this stage, you are able to sort of tailor and personalize it so much so that it fits you. So for me, an example was, as I was just going through and doing the evaluation, one of the things I do is, because we want to make sure that our indicators or our measurements are scholarly based, or really scholarly supported, what I'll do is I will research different indicators and different measurements. So that's a part of my process to help organizations. And before, what I did was I would put them in one section and I would sort of copy and paste, sort of like I forgot the software, like a Zotero, if you will. But I would take the Zotero and I would put it on my Google document, and I would just put it on one section and just sort of copy and paste just the links. And so I would just be able to always go back up to that section. Well, what I ended up changing and tailored it to me was I was able to create hyperlinks. As I was going through sort of my entire document, all I would have to do is just click that hyperlink on whatever section I was at. And so I was able just to figure out a quicker way of going back to those different sources, because as I was going through the evaluation, I knew that I did need to, or I found out at least, that I did need to keep going back to those sources because I wanted to communicate those sources to the organizations that I was helping. And so I needed to be able to have easy access to those. And so I was able just to personalize it. I think another example is presentations. The first presentation, I went through the process, sort of figured out what really worked in that time. And then after that, I sort of figured out what actually works for me. What are questions that work specifically for me? What is the best thing for me? And so I was able to personalize that presentation within that fishbone diagram. It's fishbone diagram, a thing that we talked about within some of the first couple of classes within this workshop. But I was able to figure out how to go about asking those questions to the audience I was speaking. And that's super important because you all have a different set of audiences. And so the way I may ask a question may be heard differently based off the audience. Just because I think I say a question in a certain way doesn't mean that the question's heard that way. And so it's, for me, I had to figure out how is this audience hearing what I'm saying? And for you guys, it's very similar. This comes with that personalization. And so you'll figure it out through asking these questions, which questions are best for your organization, specifically the people that are under your employment, and which questions are best for the population that you're serving. So you're figuring out which questions are best. And this is all under this idea of personalization and tailoring, which helps you know that you are at this stage of stage 4. I think a last thing that is within this stage and how you know that you're there is when you're at this place of training of trainers, or training of trainers, or a trainer of trainers. And I briefly mentioned this last week, and I said I was going to definitely touch even more on it this week, of where you know your process so much that you're able to actually teach someone else. So initially, as I was just learning the evaluations, I wasn't able to really teach somebody how to go about doing it because I was still learning from someone else. And they were teaching me, and I was just implementing it. I was figuring out what works for me, and I was still figuring out what's the best way to do this evaluation. But I did reach a place where I was able to bring someone else along and help them understand how to conduct this evaluation and how to meet with these organizations. And that's how I knew I was at this stage, because I felt comfortable. I felt confident. I knew what I was saying. I knew what I was saying so much so that it wasn't just a feeling. No, I was actually able to elaborate on that. And another way to measure this is when someone asks you questions, how comfortable do you feel in answering those questions about the evaluation? As I was going through and I was sharing this information with a woman that was working with me, she was asking me different questions, and I found that, oh my gosh, I know how to answer these. This isn't actually too hard. I can answer this because I have sufficient knowledge. And so I was able to train her because I was already trained. And it's likewise for your organizations. If you're at this stage, then you are able to train other people. It's the trainer of trainers idea, where you're training other people to then be trainers for other people. And so you are at this stage probably where you're able to take on training of other people. And so that's all that's encompassed within this stage 4. This is the final one out of all of the 4. And so next week, what we're going to be talking about is actually another vital step, but it's not within this stage. It's the follow-up. I love the follow-up because I guess the way that it was explained to me, just in general, is that following up shows that you care. And I actually experienced that firsthand in not following up with somebody and realizing how they felt. That, well, if you don't follow up, then how am I supposed to know that you really care about helping me? And we learned that through professionalism, through emails, through all these different things that even for me, employment, interviewing, after I interviewed for that job, I was taught to follow up. And it was interesting that the people that followed up, there was a higher chance of them getting that job because it showed how much they cared for the position. And in the same way, there's a huge step that I think a lot of times we miss. And that's what we're going to talk about, this idea of me following up with you guys, but at the same time, helping you guys to follow up with the people that you are serving as you're conducting this evaluation. And so that's what we're going to talk about next week. But for this week, we talked about just stage 4, just the last part of you doing, I'm watching, and it always ends with us talking. So that wraps up those 4 different stages. And again, next week, we're going to be talking about following up. And then the last week, we're going to be talking about worth your time. So 7 steps, 15 weeks, worth your time. So it's 2 more weeks out of this. Amazing how this is just went zoomed by, really zoomed by. I guess that was a pun, but I didn't mean to. Anyway, it zoomed by, and I'm really just grateful to be able to serve you guys. But now I'm open to any questions that you guys might have specifically on this subject.
Jameson, I'm wondering if you could tell us what it actually looks like to do this stage, like, you know what I mean? Like how if you were, coaching us or walking alongside us in this process, what would it look like for, you do, I watch, we talk in this particular stage?
Yeah. So specifically in this one, it's in terms of like our partnership, say that we just got out of stage 3 and I was asking all the questions and we're helping. For me, I was act as a fly on the wall. I think that's the best metaphor that I can think about, or analogy, where I'm sort of just watching as you're going through and doing it. And I may be tempted to ask questions, but I'm going to hold my tongue.
Okay.
And you may be tempted to ask different things. And sure, you could, but I think a lot of times I'm probably going to respond with, I think you probably know that. I think if you probably know that based off of all the stuff we talked about. So it's more acting as my role is more the fly on the wall, sort of watching you just go through the motions of everything that you've learned, and as you are able to solve stuff on your own. And so it's this transition with, I'm not going to answer a lot of the questions not because I don't want to, but because you probably have the answer to them already, because you have that sufficient knowledge. And so that's what that partnership specifically would look like between us if we were working together.
Okay. Thanks. And then I was thinking when you were talking about personalizing the process, it sounded, from even with the example that you gave, it sounded like it was also the problem solving. They kind of sounded like they were intermingled there. Is that typical?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. Very much so. They definitely can be linked in every single way. Yeah. And even within the example you found that it was, this is just how I problem solve in my way. I think that's how they link together, because we all problem solve in different ways. And so maybe in the other stage, I gave you a way to solve a problem my way. This is the best practice for me. And so you hear that terminology, so which is best practices. But you'll find that maybe there's this positive deviance, which is okay, where you're able to divert from this normal best practice path and be able to choose, no, actually this way works best for me. I'm going to problem solve this way. And so you're tailoring it just a little bit fitted for you.
Gotcha. Very cool. Thank you.
No, definitely. Great question. Great question. Does anybody else have any questions? Awesome. So what I would do is I will make sure to send this out by email to all of you guys after this, just to follow up. And awesome. Yes. Thank you so much. And if I don't have your email, please just make sure just to put it in the chat so I can include you on that. But I will send this recording right after this. And then hopefully I'll see you guys next week. Got you.
Thanks, Jameson.
No problem. Awesome. Have a great day, guys.
Thanks. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.